everyone, and welcome to the Invasive Species Center's Asian Carp Canada webinar series. My name is Rebecca Schroeder, and I am the Aquatic Invasive Species Liaison at the Invasive Species Center, where I manage our Asian Carp program, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you today from Robinson-Huron Treaty Territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Holmes Garden River First Nation, Batchewana First Nation, and the Métis Nation. The Invasive Species Center is a not-for-profit organization that connects stakeholders, knowledge, and technology to prevent the introduction and spread of invasive species that harm Canada's environment, economy, and society. We have a lot of great invasive species resources on our website, including species profiles, best management practices, and more. So be sure to check us out at www.invasivespeciescenter.ca. We also have our Asian Carp Canada website, and Asian Carp Canada is a program of the Invasive Species Center, and it was created to bring together information on the most recent prevention technologies, early warning measures, response efforts, and the overall threat of Asian carps to the Great Lakes and beyond. The project components aim to enhance education and knowledge of Asian carps, and we do this in partnership with many agencies across Ontario, and we have a lot of great resources that you can find on our website that include recordings of our webinar series like today's, species profiles, risk assessment summaries. We also have a bunch of social media channels that you can check out. We host information sessions, and we have an exhibit at the Toronto Zoo, just to name a few things. So before we get started with today's webinar, there are a couple of things I would like to mention. We will have time at the end of the webinar for questions, so if at any time you have one, please type it in the question box, and I will read it to our presenter after the presentation. If you are having technical difficulties at any time, please type those in the question box as well, or you can find my email in your registration email, and I will try my best to resolve it for you. Lastly, there will be a very brief survey following the webinar. If you could take some time to fill it out, we would really appreciate it. And now I will move on to our presentation. So for today, I am pleased to introduce you to Dave Marson, who is our speaker today. And he is a senior biologist at Fisheries and Oceans Canada, where he is the field operations lead for DFO's Asian Carp program. He has worked with the Asian Carp program since it began in 2012, and previous to that, he worked as a fisheries technician completing fish species at-risk sampling throughout Southern Ontario. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Dave to present.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate the intro and the opportunity to speak with everyone today. Grateful that I got to select the photo for my intro as well. I unfortunately don't get out into the field as much, so I'm always happy to reuse the photos I have from the days when I did get out there. I'm stuck in the office a lot more, but for all future webinars, I will remain the same age with that same grass carp, and I hope people enjoy that, because I do. So I will jump right into this. So I'll give you a brief outline. I want to touch on the 4 species of Asian carps and just give a little intro to each of those. And then the focus of the presentation today will be looking at the early detection component of the program, as well as response, and giving some review and updates on how things have changed since the last presentation. So with that, I will jump in. So when we refer to Asian carps, it's a collective term, but it refers, we're actually speaking about 4 species. So big head carp, silver carp, black carp, and grass carp. You'll notice that common carp is not included in these 4. They are not considered one of the Asian carp species. These 4 species all grow very quickly. As you can see, they grow very large. They each have their own kind of superpowers as far as being invasive species, where they're very effective feeders. The silver carp and big head carp feed on they're filter feeders at the lower end of the food chain, and compete with our native species that would be feeding on that component of the ecosystem. As well, black carp feed on mussel species, and a lot of our native mussels are already imperiled species, so to have another invasive species that is in and feeding on them, another predator, could be very detrimental to those populations. And then grass carp is a very efficient feeder on aquatic vegetation. So all of these species do consume very large amounts of food, 20 to 40% of their body weight every day. And again, you can see how large these fish are. Black carp can reach up to 200 pounds, the big head carp, around 100 pounds. On average, they, aren't always that big, but again, 20 to 40% of their total body weight in food each day is a large amount of food. So, why should we care? Well, because they, are on the doorstep of the Great Lakes, for one. There's a lot of work going into keeping them out of the Great Lakes, and we really want to focus on that as well, because these fish could have really detrimental impacts to our native fish species and the ecosystem if they were to invade the Great Lakes. They're highly adaptable species. They really dominate habitats and outcompete native fishes for the resources that are required in all the different life stages of our native species. They have a voracious appetite. So as I mentioned earlier, they are very effective feeders and they feed a lot, and they can outcompete our native fishes for food resources. They're also prolific breeders. So they eat effectively, they grow very quickly, they reproduce a lot, and they can very quickly dominate habitats. So in certain areas where they have established in the United States, they can represent up to 80% of the biomass in those areas. So they can outnumber native fish, 8 or 9 to 1 in those systems. So there's lots of evidence of how negative the impacts can be for these fish. So we really don't want them getting into the Great Lakes. So the immediate threat right now for the Great Lakes is grass carp. These species are showing up in low numbers. There's evidence of reproduction in a couple of tributaries in the western basin of Lake Erie in Ohio. And so they're the ones that we are really focused on at the moment, because they're the only ones that have been showing up in the Great Lakes that have been collected since 2012 when the program began. So they're the focus of efforts right now. I will reiterate, though, that while there is evidence of spawning in the US, there's no evidence of spawning in Canadian waters, and there are no established populations in Canadian waters. So we continue to focus on the early detection and removal of these fish, and to get them out of there quickly. So this image really represents a healthy and balanced ecosystem. So we're looking at a variety of fish species. There's several species of aquatic plants. We have nice clear water. You can see, amphibians and shorebirds using the ecosystem as well. And this is kind of, the ideal of what we would, hope for. And then the risk, should grass carp show up in large numbers, is they have a number of detrimental impacts that they can have. So they feed very heavily on aquatic vegetation, as I mentioned earlier. So they can really reduce the number of plants that are there, along with the variety of species. They feed, again, very, very heavily on the plants and produce a lot of waste, which can result in algal blooms, which increases the water murkiness as well. So those kind of impacts, the loss of habitat of that of the aquatic vegetation that many small fishes rely on for to hide or for spawning, is decreased, and the resulting impacts are reduced diversity of fishes in those areas. So you can see in this photo, it's a bunch of grass carp and a common carp. So many fewer species in these conditions. A lot of our species at risk really depend on clear, heavily vegetated water. So the impacts would be extremely detrimental to them. And then near shorebirds as well can certainly, they would have, there'd be serious impacts to them as well with the loss of aquatic vegetation. So just all in all, the ecosystem very degraded because of the loss of plants and other impacts that grass carp could have. So as a result of ecological risk assessments as well as socioeconomic assessments, it was determined that Asian carps would have a severe negative impact on the Great Lakes. And because of this, the federal government initiated an Asian carp program to really focus efforts on mitigating those threats and getting out early and removing these fish from Canadian waters of the Great Lakes. So, since the beginning of the program, we have been working, closely with partners in the province as well as U.S. partners to protect the Great Lakes from these highly invasive freshwater fishes. So our Asian carp program it was created based on 4 main pillars to the program. Prevention, which is really focused on outreach, research, and risk assessment. So outreach partly being, these kind of presentations and getting out to public events and letting people know about the threats. Early warning, the focus is very, very much on our early detection surveillance. So getting out with gears, trying to find these species and remove them. Response is the next step when, if we do capture them or if one is reported and confirmed, then we'll go out and again, focus efforts to remove these species. And then management, and that focuses more on regulations and pathway management to stop them from getting into the Great Lakes in the first place, into Canada. So early warning, the surveillance is really the focus to detect the threat early through surveillance alongside partners and the efforts of key organizations. So we work closely with Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. We conduct a lot of the traditional surveillance, like the nets in the water, and the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry leads the environmental DNA surveillance in the Great Lakes. And so I know there is another webinar by Dr. Chris Wilson who goes into much more detail on eDNA. So if that's an interest, please do review his webinar as well. And we do partner with the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority as well, and they conduct the same surveillance that we're doing with the electrofishing and gear types. We've done training on the different equipment, and they do the surveillance in the Toronto region. So there's really 2 key focuses of the early detection field program, and that's obviously, priority number 1 is detecting any Asian carps and removing them from the waters, not giving them an opportunity to reproduce. And as I mentioned earlier, the focus right now is especially on grass carp, and then a pre-impact baseline as well of the fish community. So we're out sampling with a number of different gears, a variety of gear sizes, so that we can really detect all the species within the fish community while we're out doing our surveillance. So every fish we catch, we identify 2 species, and we've been doing a great job of cataloging the different fish communities through the areas where we're out sampling. And so partly this provides a lot of great information with regards to what's out there now. And, again, our focus is keeping Asian carps out of the Canadian waters of the Great Lakes. But if they were to invade, then this catalog of the fish communities would really provide us good insight into what impacts these fish have when they arrive. So are there particular species that are being impacted sooner than others? So this pre-impact baseline will give us that information. So as you can imagine, that the task of keeping Asian carps out of Canadian waters of the Great Lakes is a big one. there's a vast area to be sampling, but to focus our efforts, we used science and modeling to identify priority areas. So those areas that are most suitable, would be most attractive to these fish, and then focusing efforts in those areas so that we're increasing the likelihood of coming across these species and removing them early. And so we started off in the program in 2013. We had about 24 sites that we sampled. So we were out scouting different areas, just kind of ground truthing and making sure that the areas were suitable. We increased that to 34 sites in 2014, which included some scouting of areas that weren't necessarily included long term. Some of our scouting would determine that sites were not suitable for the style of sampling that we could do. So maybe the waters were not navigable, or our gears wouldn't deploy properly there, or just what the computer models indicated versus the real world situation were two different things. So we're now up to 37 different locations, as you can see on the map, and these are sites that we try to go back to every year. I will flag that we have not been going to Lake Superior the past couple of years in order to focus more efforts closer to the southwestern basin of Lake Erie, where, again, we know those sites are in close proximity to known spawning populations of grass carp, and no Asian carps have ever been detected in Lake Superior, so the threat is particularly low there. So right now we're kind of focusing efforts in those areas. We're more likely to come across these fish so that we can remove them early before they have an opportunity to spread. Some of the conditions that we look at are, unimpeded river length, the flow, temperature, and then we also included a couple of large wetland areas where there's high productivity. So I'll jump into some of our traditional gear surveillance, so some of the different gear types that we use while we're out doing our early detection. So one of the gears we use is hoop nets. So early on in the program, we had just a 6-foot hoop net. We found them quite large and cumbersome, so we've adjusted to having a 5-foot diameter net and a 3-foot diameter net. So we use these nets in deeper flowing water where we have challenges setting any other gear type. So electrofishing is pretty good in flowing water, but only to maybe about 3 meters depth. So anything beyond that, the fish don't shock well, they don't come up to the boat. So these nets provide an opportunity to fish those deeper waters. And as I mentioned earlier, we do try to fish the full fish community that's there. So we use a variety of mesh sizes, and the hoop nets have a coarser mesh, about a 1-inch mesh, so smaller fishes can pass through it, but larger fishes become entangled and they can be brought up and processed. So we set these nets for about 48 hours. You can see we've had about 139 nets deployed between 2015 and 2019. Again, it's specific habitats where we do set these, so they aren't set at every site, and they're set for longer periods, 48 hours, couple days, because they don't have a lead or anything to direct fish into them. So they generally don't have as large a catch, and the fish survive well in these nets. So we set them a little bit longer, and so fewer nets do get deployed. Another style of net that we used early on in the program and continue to is a fyke net. So it's a much smaller mesh size net. It's deployed near shore in low or no flow habitats. It can go in areas with very heavy or very sparse vegetation. Early on in the program, we found a lot of turtles were finding these nets and going in and using our fish catches as a bit of a buffet. So as you can see on the bottom, we have some netting that we added to the front, which is turtle exclusion netting. So we have had great success in cutting down the number of turtles getting into our nets and consuming our catch of fishes. But we still get a lot of fish in these nets too, and surprisingly large ones sometimes. So they seem to be motivated to go in. And this is a net that we deploy in a lot of the different early detection surveillance locations. It's easy to set. It's very effective for small fishes, and so that's why we have over 1,350 sets between 2015 and 2019. And I'll just flag we did have surveillance work in 2020. However, we're still updating our database with that information. So I didn't have final numbers, and I did not include that in today's presentation. Another style of net that we use is the trap net. It works much the same as the fyke nets, although it's a coarser mesh size, so it's not capturing those small bodied fishes that the fyke nets do, but it's a much larger net overall, scaled up version, and is much better at catching larger bodied fishes. So we get a lot of carp and gar and large nearshore fishes like that in these nets. And again, it's one that's pretty widely used. It's nearshore, works best in about 4 or 5 feet depth of water. So we do get a lot of these set as well. We've had 981 deployed between 2015 and 2019. Seining is another method that we use for the nearshore and smaller bodied fishes. It's a fine mesh net. Again, we're somewhat limited in the areas you can sample just based on the style of net. You can't have very rocky shoreline or lots of logs or debris where the net would get snagged up on. So there are particular areas that we can sample. Again, it can't be too high flow because we're wading and pulling the net, and again, limited by the depth that people can get out and pull the nets. It's a very effective means of catching smaller body fishes, but larger ones can quite easily outrun us when we're trying to pull this net through the water. So it's not as effective, obviously, for the large grass carp that are showing up in low numbers. That's what we've found in Canadian waters is just those large adults. So we tend to focus our efforts more on the netting styles that are better for the larger fishes. But we do, as you can see, we've done 430 hauls. We do get out and seine as well. And again, it's nicer for that full fish community assessment. And another method that we use is boat electrofishing. And so we did start out the program with a single electrofishing boat, but we are up to 4 boats now. It's a very effective means of capturing a variety of sizes of fishes. So it uses pulsed electricity, which will actually pull fish towards the boats. And as they get closer, the gradient in electricity will stun the fish. And when they turn belly up, the netters on the front can dip net those fish out of the water, place them in a live well where they actually, they recover very quickly. So it's actually, pretty low impact sampling style on the fish, and works, as I said, very well in a variety of habitat types. So you can have very complex substrates, and it still works well to pull fish out of those areas. I'll flag that. Not only do we have more boats now, but we've actually customized them as well, so that the railing on the front will actually swing out, and we can deploy nets off of these boats too. So we've integrated some new sampling styles that have been especially good for response, and now we can do that off of a single boat. So we can set a net and then go in and shock as well. And you can see with 372 hours between 2015 and 2019 that we get out and do a lot of shocking whenever we're out through the summer. So another style of net that we're using, again, that we introduced early on in the program is trammel nets and tied down gill nets. And so one thing that's kind of changed over the years is, well, one, our familiarity with the nets, so we're getting much more efficient at fishing them. But we've adjusted kind of the mesh size in the nets. We started out with about a 3-inch mesh and have gone to 3.5 or like a 7-inch stretch mesh. And so it reduces the amount of bycatch of smaller sucker species. But both of these nets are very effective at entangling larger species. The trammel nets have been our most effective gear type for capturing large grass carp. So they work similar to a gill net. They do have a gill net panel in the middle of the trammel net. And so the gill net itself is selective for the size of fish that will get entangled in that. They can fit their head through the net, but then they can't fit their whole body. And so they're entangled in the net in that way. The trammel nets have two coarser nettings on either side of the gill net as well. And so not only the fish that would get gilled in the net, but larger fish can be captured because they'll go through that and end up getting bagged in the net. So the trammel nets are, again, very effective for those quite large fish. And we have started, we've kind of adjusted how we use the trammel nets as well since my last presentation. So early on in the program, we were using pounding techniques, kind of hitting the boat and revving the engines and doing that to push fish into these nets. So we will block off an area of habitat with the net, and then we would go inside of that with the boats and use these different techniques to scare fish and increase the likelihood of them coming in contact with the net. And so we have adapted now to actually going in there with an electric fishing boat. So the electric fishing works well because we can, any large fish that we can collect electric fishing, they're a lot easier to process by dip netting them than having to pull them out of the entangled net. But often large fish will feel the electricity from a distance too and will flee an area. And so using electricity from the electric fishing boats has been very effective at, in combination with the trammel nets, to catch those fish that we wouldn't otherwise catch just electric fishing. So we've found that that combination has been far our most successful in capturing grass carp. And then finally, on the very small side of the sampling of the fish community is our larval light traps and our bongo nets. So we are not expecting to be finding eggs or larval fishes from Asian carps, from grass carp in Canadian waters, but we started sampling in 2016, getting accustomed to the deployment of these nets and how to fish them, so that we are comfortable if there is ever any indication that spawning could be happening, we can get out. We have the gears and the expertise to be deploying and searching for those life stages, the eggs and larval fish. So we have been collecting larval and egg fishes for the past few years and sending them for DNA analysis to screen for the possibility of any Asian carps in those samples. And we've not had any positive samples to date. I'm just going to flag, so the bongo net, it is towed beside, like laterally in the water column beside the boat. We tow for about 3 minutes, and it's a 500 micron mesh, so it's very, very fine mesh. And then the light trap on the bottom right works. There's an orange cap on that one, but that would come off, and a waterproof flashlight would be placed in the middle of that trap, and the light would reflect off the bottom tin section on the bottom. And it worked similar to a porch light with moths, where we set these in the evening, they float at the surface, and that light shines out and would attract larval fish in towards the trap. And we set them for about an hour because it attracts larval fishes as well as larval predators. So in order to have some samples there, we can't deploy it for too long. Otherwise, we would just wind up with a bunch of, well, much like the turtles in our fyke nets in the past, we had some fat and happy larval predators in those traps and no larval fish. And here I have a summary of our surveillance data from 2013 to 2019. And so it just gives a sense of, the increased number of sites that have been sampled through the years. I'll flag, early on in the program, we had just a couple of crews that were out doing the early detection surveillance. And we have increased that to have up to 5 crews out through the summer. So, for 4 crews doing the early detection, the traditional sampling gears, and then a larval crew. We have a lot of students that do come out and support the program as well. So every year we have upwards of 13 students that go out in the boats with our full-time technicians that lead the sampling crews. You'll see that there's a kind of variation in the number of water bodies sampled as well. So certain years we did additional scouting work to sample tributaries that we thought of possibly including in our early detection surveillance, but there were situations where obviously those tributaries weren't suitable to be included. So although we did sample them that year, we didn't include them in future years. Total number of fishes obviously increased as our number of crews and number of people out sampling increased, but still kind of ups and downs through the years. I'll flag in years where we had more responses, there could be less sampling occurring because when we have crews out conducting our response exercises or targeted sampling, then they're not out doing our early detection surveillance. And then also, certain years with high water, you end up with fewer fishes being captured. Number of species has changed over the years as well. Again, we're doing sampling in Superior up until about 2016. And so there are several species that were caught during surveillance in Lake Superior that are not caught in the other lakes. So as a result, we have fewer species detected in some of the more recent years, but it changes year over year. But the more sampling we do, the more we feel like we have a complete representation of the fish communities in those different areas. And we have buffalo and common carp separated out here as well. And that's because we, again, don't expect to be capturing a lot of Asian carps. Obviously, if they're there, we want to be detecting them. But we use these surrogate species to show that the gears that we're using are effective in capturing these large, highly mobile native, well, not native species as far as common carp, but they're widely distributed, large species, and so it just shows the gears that we're sampling and the areas that we're sampling would be suitable for Asian carp as well. And then the number of grass carp captured, this is just in our early detection surveillance. So this is separate from response activities where we go out once a fish has been detected somewhere and do our targeted sampling. This is during our early detection surveillance. And I will flag that we have another capture in 2020 as well in Jordan Harbor. So we have 3 grass carp that have been detected in early detection surveillance. And in each case, including the 2020, they were entangled in trammel nets. And then a summary of our larval sampling. Again, we did start deploying nets in 2016, but it was just kind of to get used to the sampling itself. We did more collections in 2017, 2018, and 2019. And you can see we did collect quite a few fishes and had success with both gear types in detecting larval fishes as well as eggs. It's very difficult to see from this photo, but there are both larval fishes as well as eggs in the bottom of that sample, and that was one that would have been from a bongo trap, bongo net. So the next step, obviously, with early detection surveillance is, from time to time, as I mentioned, we've caught grass carp. We've also had fish that have been reported from commercial catches or recreational anglers. And in these instances, then we go from our early detection surveillance into response. And so we really want to ensure a unified and coordinated team can respond to incidents. So we have organized ourselves in a manner of using instant command systems to get out there and do our sampling. because we really want to be sure that we can get out there and take action to help reduce or eliminate the threat of these species, find them quickly and remove them from the Canadian waters of the Great Lakes. And since the program began in 2012, 29 grass carp have been detected in Canadian waters of the Great Lakes. So just give you an idea of how many have been captured. Yeah, so I'll jump right in this. So this gives you an idea of what exactly happens. So every time a fish is detected, we do respond. So we will stand up incident command systems, and we will have an incident commander, and we look into, okay, what exactly is the situation? So every time a fish is found and is verified as a grass carp, then our system is activated. We will collect the specimen and bring it back to our lab and assess it. So we have to figure out, is this species capable of reproduction? So with grass carp, there are fish in the Great Lakes that are fertile, that can reproduce, and ones that are sterile. So there are fish that are used and stocked in ponds in the US because they are very efficient and effective at removing aquatic nuisance vegetation. However, the big threat is when they escape into the wild. Again, they're so effective at removing aquatic vegetation that they can have a real detrimental impact on the ecosystem. And so it's important for us to know when one of these fish is captured is, can it reproduce or not? Because obviously a fish that can reproduce and produce offspring will have a much more negative impact on the future ecosystem than a fish that's not capable of reproducing. It'll still have negative impacts for its lifetime, but it's not producing offspring, which then can produce offspring. So depending on the situation, the severity of it, we will send out crews to do targeted sampling to try and collect any additional fish that are there. And if more fish are collected, then we send those to the lab as well and determine the risks from those, and can determine, do we need more crews to go out and sample, or if no additional fish are captured over a period of time, then we'll stand down operations and move back to early detection surveillance. So this slide gives you an idea of the number of responses that we have completed since from 2015 to 2020. We did add that 2020 data in. As I mentioned, there have been 29 grass carp captured since 2012. You can see 2016 was a particularly busy summer. We had an incident in Lake Gibson, and I will talk about that in a little more detail in the next couple slides. But that's where the picture of myself with the 4 grass carp is from. We ended up capturing 10 grass carp in one area that summer. But we were out on a number of different incidents in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. We didn't have any in 2019, and then another in 2020. So again, it's been several years, not a lot of fish, which is really good news because we're not getting a lot of detections otherwise either. We have, there's a lot of commercial fishing going on and recreational fishing, and they're very, very few. So it's great that we're getting out there and finding these and removing them, and there's not a lot of others there. So just to review, 11 captures have resulted in on-the-water response operations. So depending on the situation, we don't always send out crews. We will always respond and assess the situation, but not always send out additional boats for sampling. We've had, again, 3 captures actually now that have occurred during early detection surveillance, including the fish in 2020. 17 of those captures have been sterile fish, 10 have been diploid, and a couple of unknown, where it was fish that were dead and found on shore. So they were kind of too decomposed to do an assessment of if they were reproductively viable or not. And 16 grass carp have been captured by DFO field crews, and a number of the others that have been captured have been in gears similar to what we use, so trap nets or gill nets. And I'll just briefly review a couple of the response operations that we have had over the years. So our biggest, most complex operation was around the Toronto Islands in September of 2015. We had a couple of grass carp that were captured. We had a number of agencies that were out, from DFO, Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, as well as Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. And so we had a couple of responses in Toronto that summer, and generated a lot of interest. It's the only time where we would get these kind of aerial view footage, because we actually had media helicopters filming the event. But again, it was particularly interesting because we had a lot of crews and a lot of effort out there. Eight boats on the water, 20 staff on site per day, 550 man hours of on-site effort. So a lot of effort went in to sampling around the Toronto Islands and trying to detect any additional grass carp that might have been there and remove them. In 2016, as I mentioned earlier, we had the response in Lake Gibson. So in this case, there was a recreational angler who had captured a fish, taken a photo, posted it to social media, wasn't aware of what it was, and it was identified as a grass carp, confirmed. We followed up and were given a location of where the fish was released. So we knew there was at least one fish in that system, and following 10 days of sampling, we had removed 10 grass carp in total from that system. So it was again a combined effort between Fisheries and Oceans Canada and Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. A lot of trammel netting and electrofishing went into that effort, and we did go back in subsequent years. No additional fish were detected, so we feel confident all the fish were removed. And then in 2020, this past year, we had one grass carp captured in Jordan Harbor, and so we were doing our early detection surveillance, captured the fish, we had it sent back to the lab, and quickly found out it was a reproductively viable specimen. And so we immediately initiated our operations and sent additional crew. We had 3 crews sampling. Again, a couple of electrofishing boats and a netting boat. Did a lot of electrofishing and trammel netting, but no additional fish were captured, so we stood down operations. And I'll flag too that we have done a number of exercises in the US as well. We've been to the Sandusky River, where we know fish are spawning, and have completed a number of sampling events there. So it's been a great opportunity to work with partners from the US and share ideas about different gear types and deployment styles, and to get an opportunity to fish in waters where we know there are fish present, and have had great, very good success in removing a bunch of fish during these exercises. And then I'll flag too just the importance of, we have had a number of responses, but it's always important too to continue and practice and feel comfortable in the skills you learn, and need to be honed for when we do go into response. So we've done a number of response exercises with our partners as well, to make sure kind of everybody's on the same page with roles and responsibilities, and how the incident command system works on the water, and just make sure that we everybody's on the same page. So this is a slide just indicating some areas where grass carp have been captured, as well as areas where they're likely to be seen as well. So important for water users to be aware of where to really be keeping an eye out and be diligent and watching for these fish if they happen to be showing up. And so we've kind of identified a few different areas where we would expect people could see them, and so just to be extra diligent if you happen to be in those areas. So along that train of thought, obviously we want people to be out there. The more eyes on the water, the better. We do get a lot of reports every year of Asian carps that have been seen, and so we have on the asiancarp.ca and invadingspecies.com, the websites, there's different identification guides, and I'll just go through a few of the different details as well here. So in this case, fall fish is one of the most commonly mistaken species for grass carp. I'll just flag, in this case, they both have that short dorsal fin. The grass carp does have larger scales, where fall fish is more moderate, but the big difference is really the eye placement. And I'll just go back and forth on this slide. You can see on the left, the grass carp, where the eye is more in line with the mouth. And then in this picture above, the eye is really high on the head. So that's kind of the key way of deciphering those two. Other species that are often misidentified are some of the sucker species, white suckers. And so they do have a very different mouth placement on the suckers, down facing, and their eyes also sit high on the head. The white suckers also have scales that are compressed or closer together and smaller at the front of their body, and then behind their dorsal fin, they're more evenly spaced. So there's a few different ways of telling them apart, where grass carp, the scales are evenly spaced, the full length of the body. And then buffalo species are also, again, species that can be seen near shore. They have the large scales. Same as common carp in a lot of respects, you see those large scales, but both the buffalo and the common carp are a bit deeper bodied fish, but they both have the long dorsal fin as well, where grass carp have a short one. So those are kind of the key things to keep in mind when you see these. These characteristics are pretty obvious once you know what you're looking for. And so I will flag that, we really do need everyone's help in fighting Asian carps, and it's important that we have everybody who's near shore able to identify these species. And if you do see one, it's very important for us if you can get a photo and a location on these species. If you capture one as an angler, then don't release it, keep it. Call the invading species hotline or go to EdMaps. Do keep it on ice. We ask that you double bag it and keep the head above ice, because we do use the eyes in our ploidy assessment. So determining if the fish is reproductively viable or not, we can take genetic material from the eyes several days after the fish has died and still determine the reproductive viability. And we'll make arrangements to pick it up. So yeah, it's very important that people are aware of how to identify these species, and then the reporting protocols as well. And I just wanted to flag some additional information that's out there as well. So on DFO's YouTube channel, we do have a much shorter video, about 3 minutes, on grass carp identification. So it goes into a little more detail, as well as reporting. And then a video about our response program as well. So there's the web address for that. Then there's also protecting the Great Lakes from Asian carp. So there's a YouTube video about our Asian carp program. And then the last one is a TVO Kids show. It's called Leo's Fish Heads. And we had an episode where we had the show come out and film with us doing some on the water work for our early detection surveillance. And so it's a great kind of intro for school age kids to kind of see the science that we're doing and our surveillance work, and just get people more excited about aquatic invasive species. I know it is touched on in grade school as well, so it's a nice opportunity to show some video of what we're doing. And with that, I will jump into the question and answer period, and thank you all very much for attending.
Thank you, Dave, for that great presentation and for giving us a really good update on what you guys are doing at DFO. Really appreciate having you. So we do have time for some questions. We have a couple that have come in during the presentation. So the first one is, with the screen in place in front of spike nets, are you catching any grass carp?
Yeah, I will just flag again that so we do have a number of different gear types that are set in each of our early detection surveillance locations. And so we're trying to have gears that would catch all life stages. So although we might be less likely to capture the very large grass carp in the fyke nets, if there were smaller individuals in the water body, then they could be captured in the fyke nets. I think in every location where we set fyke nets, we also have trap nets. And so they are larger style, more suited to capturing those larger bodied fishes. And we also conduct electrofishing and trammel netting in each of our early detection surveillance locations. And those methods are also very effective for the larger bodied fish. So we do a variety of gears. So although maybe the fyke nets wouldn't be as effective at capturing large grass carp, we have other gears that are deployed in the same area.
Okay, the next question is, of the reproducing grass carp that have been captured in Canadian waters, how many have been related to the reproducing populations in the Sandusky and Maumee River?
Yeah, we don't have any reproducing fish in Canadian waters. We have captured fish that are capable of reproduction, but there's no evidence of reproduction actually happening in Canadian waters. So I'll just flag that to start. That I would have to go back to, I would love to be able to circle back and actually, confirm with some of the papers that have recently come out, because I think there have been some fish, a couple of fish from Lake Gibson that were tied back to the Sandusky River. But we've had the majority of reproductively viable fish were actually captured in Lake Ontario, and there's not a whole lot of evidence that they necessarily came from Sandusky. So, but again, I'd like to go back to the studies to give a kind of a 100% satisfaction on that answer. So I'd be grateful if you would give me whoever's name it was who asked, and I can try to get back to them.
Definitely, we can for sure follow up. The next question is, do you know if there's a funding source regarding carp surveys, mitigation, and that kind of thing?
No, I mean, no, that's something I think would be better for our the outreach component of the program to answer. My understanding is no. We are leading surveillance. We have partners that we work with, but we don't have the same as in the U.S. where there are contracted commercial fishermen, where there are those very dense populations in the Illinois River. We are not doing that in Canadian waters.
Great. The next question is, do you have any idea how so many grass carp appeared in Lake Gibson?
I mean, that's a great question. Very interesting. And then a little bit, yeah, certainly perplexing, I guess. I would flag that once they're in Lake Gibson, there's really not an opportunity for them to get out. So whether they were intentionally placed in Lake Gibson or if they happen to migrate in there together and then couldn't then escape, we don't really know exactly how they got in there in the first place. That's a real challenge to determine, fish movement. But they weren't able to get out of that area, and it was not a suitable area for spawning either. So it was kind of a trap for them, and so great for us in a way where we knew there was fish in there and we could get in there and sample that area very intensively, and we're successful in capturing so many of them and removing them.
Okay, the next question is, how quickly is your rapid response deployed once an incident is reported?
I mean, that really depends on the situation, right? So we do assess each situation to determine the risk, but we are able to deploy very quickly. I mean, in the case of Jordan Harbor, kind of an ideal situation in that, you know, we were the ones that collected the fish in the first place, that caught it. We were able to transfer it to the lab quickly. We had results in a few hours. And, you know, within the same day, we're able to stand up operations. So, I mean, that's kind of as quick as could be. But we do, you know, that's the role of the program, is to be responding quickly. So that's always our focus, but you know, it kind of depends on, again, where a fish is caught and where our crews are at the time of capture too. So it's there's no definitive answer, but again, our focus is to respond very quickly and you know, do everything we can to reduce the risk of Asian carps in Canadian waters of the Great Lakes.
Okay, the next question is a bit of a two-part question. So do we have knowledge about the path that grass carp are taking to enter the Great Lakes from American waters? And as a follow-up to that, why aren't there any sampling sites east of Duffins on Lake Ontario?
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly we know there are the reproducing populations in the western basin of Lake Erie. Otherwise, if fish are, you know, entering by other means, it can be challenging to track that. So that's why we, again, have widely distributed sites through the Great Lakes and do our surveillance, you know, in a number of different areas. We don't have a lot of sites east of Duffins, partly because of the challenge to surveillance in many of the tributaries east of there. There's not a lot of navigable water where we can get in with our boats and nets and gears that are effective in capturing these species. As well, there are a number of impediments to, you know, fish movement up certain rivers as well. For, you know, Asian carps, they may not have the ability to get to a point where they could be reproductively successful. So it would be a, you know, lower risk tributaries. And then there is also on farther eastern Ontario, MNRF conducts surveillance work as well. So there's there is surveillance work that's not necessarily targeted to Asian carps, but, you know, the use of gears through commercial fishing, as well as you know, science surveys to assess fish communities. So and those would be effective at capturing grass carp if they were in the area as well.
Oh, I was muted. Sorry, I was talking and I was muted.
Okay.
You think I'd be better at this by now? So the next question I was answering because it was regarding the webinar series. You mentioned the eDNA webinar we had a few years back. So you can find that one on our website, www.asiancarp.ca, and it was by Dr. Chris Wilson. And then the next question was, how far do grass carp typically range?
Well, that's I mean, that's a good question as well. There's you know, there are studies that are giving a better idea of the movement of grass carp. Seems a lot of them they, you know, they're big fish that have the capacity to travel long distances, but you know, studies are showing that they tend not to. So there's certainly information out there. Again, this would be something to be, you know, there's a lot of variety within the the species of certain fish moving more distance and others really not moving much at all. So there's no kind of generalization to that that I can come up with.
Okay, and then the last question we have is actually not related to Asian carp, but and this person is wondering if you've ever found any northern snakeheads in Canada, I guess.
No, not certainly not since the Asian carp program has begun, and not since I've been working on AIS. We've never detected them in Canadian waters through surveillance work. So no.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Oh, actually, one more came through. So we'll just do that one and then I'll wrap up. The last one is, are you keeping good records of bycatch that may be useful for fish community monitoring by other agencies like MNRF?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's one of the main goals of the program with doing our full fish community assessment. And we are identifying every fish to species. We record lengths of specimens. We will keep vouchers as well so that they can be confirmed and cataloged at the Royal Ontario Museum, as well as digital vouchers for ourselves. So yeah, we collect a lot of habitat data as well as fish data when we're out sampling, because we, you know how valuable it is while we're out there to be collecting that information and archiving that. And we do share it, sorry, I should say, in our manuscript reports as well. We send out, they're all available online through the DFO Waves library. And so you can see summaries of our early detection surveillance work that we've done each year, as well as summaries of our species captured and distribution of our sampling. So that information is all available.
Awesome. Okay, well, if there are any more questions, please feel free to send me an email and I can do my best to get you in touch with someone who can answer it for you. Thank you again for listening, everyone, and thank you again to Dave for presenting today. That was an awesome presentation. This webinar was recorded and it will be posted on our website, www.asiancarp.ca, and as well as our invasivespeciescenter.ca website. If you could please take a few minutes to fill out the survey at the end of this webinar, we would really appreciate it. And you can also visit our website for registration for our next 2 webinars. In 2 weeks from now, we're going to have a webinar on Asian Carp Canada and talking about some education and outreach work that we do, which will partially be presented by me. And then if you're interested in learning about other invasive species, we're having a webinar on February 25th about the risk of oak wilt to Canada. So stay tuned for that, and you can find registration on our website right here. And that's everything. So take care, everyone. Thanks again.